So good morning. Thank you for joining us for the American Horse Council's first virtual conference. I'm Julie Broadway, President and CEO at the Council, and we're delighted to have you with us for this session, which is the Recreation, Trails, and Land Use Committee. For first-time attendees, I just want to give you a brief overview of the Council and our mission and how we conduct ourselves. So the Council was formed in 1969 to serve as the unified voice of the equine industry in Washington, D.C. We are a bipartisan advocacy organization that seeks to address the social, economic, and legislative interests of the U.S. equine industry. As you are probably no doubt aware, the equine industry is very diverse, and that means we often have different points of view about certain topics. And for that reason, our goal is to work on issues where the industry has consensus, or we can coalesce around a solution. And when the industry cannot agree on an issue, to avoid divisiveness, the Council seeks to address all sides of the subject but remains neutral. Today, we're going to hear a variety of topics in our respective committees, and we hope you will find this informative, educational, and useful. A virtual platform is new to us, so of course there are probably going to be a few glitches here and there, but a couple of housekeeping things to try to have the best experience for everyone. First, please be sure that you are on mute, and we would like to call your attention to the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. If you're not familiar with Zoom, along the bottom of your screen, you will find a list of various features. Please use the chat feature to submit any questions for our speakers to address, and we'll come back around to those as we have time to address them. We may also incorporate a polling feature, which is a way for us to post a question and ask you to give us some feedback. So when those appear, we hope you'll help us out. Lastly, if time permits and we have the need, we may also conduct some breakout sessions to allow for smaller group discussion. So with that, I will add this session is being recorded and will be available for playback later on. I'm going to turn this over to our committee chair, which is Craig Huffines. He is the CEO at the American Quarter Horse Association. And the staff liaison for this committee is our Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs, Brian Brindle. So with that, gentlemen, I'm going to let you take it away.
Well, Julie, thank you for those introductions. And yeah, what an interesting time we're in. A meeting like this, sure wish we could all be together around the campfire. It's always enjoyable to see you all. I know Brian has done a wonderful job of putting together the agenda for this meeting. And so I'm going to lean on him a little bit to take us through these different policy matters, but we also need to go through a little bit of old business, and I think we've all slept since the last time we met. So from that standpoint, perhaps, Brian, you could walk us through a little bit of what's been going on here this summer, and then, of course, our minutes from the previous meeting we'll have to officially approve, I believe.
All right. Thanks, Craig. So do you want to walk through the minutes first, get those approved?
Sure. Yes, sir.
We distributed the minutes before the meeting, so hopefully everyone's had a chance to review them. Just some quick highlights. We did talk about a lot of the activity that had been taking place early in the Congress with the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. A lot of our advocacy focused on the Restore Our Parks Act at that time. And we also talked a little bit about some legislation that we had voted to oppose, which is the Bikes in the Wilderness bill in the Senate. So those are some key items from the minutes from 2019.
Get back off mute here. Okay, does anybody have any questions regarding the minutes? Everybody in good shape? Okay, well, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Holly. Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, and there you have it. Okay, moving along here. New business. Brian, you want to walk us through here, legislative recap of
Yep.
what on this fall in the middle of all of the dust that we're going through politically, how things are looking on that front.
Well, so we are about to be joined pretty soon here by Terry Camp. He's a senior staff member with the House Natural Resources Committee. And many of the committee members have met with Terry on various issues. So hopefully he'll be joining the call very soon and give us just sort of a recap of what's been going on the past 2 years. Following that, I'm going to give a very brief update on the Great American Outdoors Act, which, as many of you know, has been the culmination of a lot of the advocacy that we've been conducting over the past couple of years. Then we'll segue into a more minor but focused bill, the MAP Land Act, which has been moving in the Senate. The horse industry has proposed some language to benefit the industry on that front. Randy will then segue into a discussion on the National Forest Service and updates on activity. So that should be very interesting. It's an agenda item that we've been looking at also for the past several years. We'll also talk about e-bikes and public and private land disputes. And for now, I'm going to ask if Terry Camp is on the call. Terry, are you there?
Yeah, can you see me and hear me? Sorry.
Oh, we can hear you pretty clearly. So
Okay, good.
Terry,
Yeah,
I'm going to do a quick
sorry.
introduction here. So very quickly, Terry, just to lay the groundwork, a lot of people haven't met with you in a while. Terry does serve as a senior advisor on the GOP staff of the House Natural Resources Committee. And during the past 3 years, we've worked very closely with him. He's very familiar with the needs of the recreational riders and always provides helpful insights into the agenda. Terry is a native of Hyde Park, Utah, and has been involved in politics at the local, state, and federal level. He graduated from Utah State in 2011 with a BA in poli-sci. In 2016, he earned a master's in public policy from George Mason University in Virginia. While studying at Utah State, Terry interned on Capitol Hill for Congressman Rob Bishop. After graduating, he worked as a campaign staffer for Senator Hatch's successful 2012 re-election bid. Following the 2012 Utah primary, Senator Hatch hired Terry to work in his Washington office. In 2015, House Natural Resources Committee Chairman Rob Bishop hired Terry to work on the subcommittee on federal lands. He currently manages the committee's National Park Service portfolio, very important to us. He lives with his wife Kayla in Arlington and is expecting a son in February. So with that, Terry, we will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Sorry, I must have screwed up on my bio. So we actually live in Silver Spring now. We moved from Arlington. And the reason I'm broadcasting from my car is we have a big home renovation project today that happened at the same time. So they're installing a basement gutter at our house. And so I'm sitting in the car because they're jackhammering in my basement. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. So Brian, I guess you just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the major bills that have passed this Congress to start out. So it has been a pretty productive Congress for public lands, like a pretty historic Congress. So at the very beginning of the Congress, we passed S47, which was a major public lands omnibus with hundreds of different provisions. And then obviously we through that bill, and we've passed permanent authorization of land and water conservation fund deposits. And then obviously more recently we passed the Great American Outdoors Act, which built on the mandatory deposits and now will offer mandatory a mandatory $900 million out of the Land and Water Conservation Fund for perpetuity. And then as part of that bill, we obviously passed the Restore Our Parks and Public Lands Act that my boss had been very active on to try to get funding to national parks, national forests, BLM lands. And so it has been like I said, a historic Congress. On the committee, it's been very, very quiet the past couple months as we prepare for the election. My boss, Congressman Bishop, the ranking member of the committee, is retiring. And so we will have a new ranking member coming in the new Congress. It's unclear who that will be yet. It could possibly be Bruce Westerman of Arkansas, or possibly Tom McClintock of California. But we're waiting to see. It'll be up to the steering committee, who will sort of interview candidates, and we'll know more after the election who will be the new ranking member of the committee. It's been other than these two like kind of major bills, most of the rest of it has been pretty quiet. A lot of small public lands bills. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what else to say on that, Brian, but it's been a quiet few months. I don't anticipate a lot happening in the lame duck, but that's yet to be seen. I know that the Senate has had some conversations about a small lands package of some sort, or a recreation package. But those conversations really haven't started in earnest yet. I assume the Senate's just waiting to see what happens in the election. Some of those items that we've been talking to the Senate about, even though we haven't really gotten to any consensus on what's going to happen or if a bill is going to come together, but we have been talking to them about the SOAR Act, which has been introduced by Representative Holland in the House and Senator Heinrich in the Senate. It's basically the latest iteration of the Guides and Outfitters Act, or GO Act. It's kind of a compromise bill that has a number of provisions, dealing with outfitters and guides on public lands and how to streamline their permitting processes and lower their costs to secure new permits. And the Senate, they like some portions of it, but they have apprehensions about opening up FLREA, the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act. So that's been kind of a sticking point, and why the SOAR Act hasn't moved really in the Senate. I know we're looking at some additional authorities. For example, the Army Corps of Engineers is not under the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act. So that's something we're interested in discussing. BLM has asked us, in the past for additional authorities and concessions authorities. So those could be things that are on the table. I'm trying to see if there's other things on my list that the Senate has been talking about. A lot of it is surrounding kind of online permitting and, bringing us into the 21st century with some of our permitting processes. Some agencies have done a little of this and, had pilot programs, but there's a lot more that can be done. And then we're still working with the Senate to try to figure out like multi-jurisdictional permit processing. Like if you start on BLM land and then go to to a national forest, and how do you get those permits to begin with, and how do you establish a lead agency? And these are a lot of frustrations to outfitters and guides. And then we're still big on pushing like cross trail maintenance and ensuring that trails, have the same, standards and are maintained at the same levels, whether you cross onto another agency's land or not. So those are all things that are still in discussion, but we honestly, I don't know what's going to happen in the election. I wish I had kind of a crystal ball, but I assume the House will stay in the minority in the House, and we'll see about the Senate. So.
Very good. So Terry, one piece of legislation we really did focus on a lot, I would say throughout most of 2019, was the Restore Our Parks Act, and your boss championed that bill.
And that was the part of the
FORS Act, but so just talk about some of the components of Restore Our Parks Act and why you think it's so important to the recreational community.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been pushing for maintenance funding, especially for the National Park Service, for a really long time. And my boss, he introduced the bill and felt passionately about it, but ultimately ended up voting against the Great American Outdoors Act because they combined it with the permanent Land and Water Conservation Fund mandatory appropriation. And so he supported the Restore Our Parks Act portion, but just couldn't support the rest of the bill. So the Restore Our Parks Act, the only downside, I guess, to it is it receives money from offshore oil and gas as well as onshore oil and gas development, but it only receives money after every other account has been credited. So every other like statutorily created account. So after all those other funds, so like Land and Water Conservation Fund, Historic Preservation Fund, Go Mesa, etc. After all those are funded, it gets 50% of revenues up to, I think it's 1.8 in their bill. It was higher in their bill than it was in ours, annually for 5 years, 1.8 billion. And so it's great. And, we assume they will get money, but it's all dependent on royalties from oil and gas. And so where those have dipped so substantially, I don't know what they'll be getting into the fund in the first year. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is fine. It will get its full, 900 million. And on top of that, it has billions and billions saved up, over the years because they don't typically spend all 900 million out of it. But the Restore Our Parks Fund could, may not get the full amount the first year just because of oil prices and royalties. We're still waiting on numbers for that to see what will end up coming in, but that's I guess the one downside with it. And the other downside is it's just 5 years. It's a sort of a quick infusion of capital to these agencies, but it expires. So the Land and Water Conservation Fund is permanent forever, but the parks only get 5 years of this kind of special funding. And the vast majority of the funding goes to the parks. The Forest Service is next. I think they get 15%, and then BLM and Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they get a portion as well, and Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're excited about it, and I think it'll be a huge deal to the parks and to our forest lands and to public recreation opportunities. But now we're also going to acquire $900 million of land a year in perpetuity, and there's no money really to maintain that. So like, it's great that, they'll have more money, I guess, for, stateside grants and other parks, but there's no other maintenance money along with that. So that was one of our concerns about Land and Water Conservation Fund permanent funding was, there's no money for ongoing maintenance beyond these 5 years. And then we're also concerned with the Land and Water Conservation Fund about the 100th meridian. So the bill removed a requirement that the agencies have struggled to maintain, that a certain portion of the land acquired through Land and Water Conservation Fund has to be acquired east of the 100th meridian, so basically in the eastern part of the United States. And so we're concerned that this will just lead to a lot more land in the west being tied up, and the Forest Service and other agencies may not have any incentive to, acquire much in the east. So those were some of our concerns about the Great American Outdoor Act, but it's the law of the land now, and we'll keep trying to push for better transparency with it. We're concerned a little bit because it kind of takes Congress out of the picture now that it's mandatory spending. So the agencies will have a significantly larger amount of money, but without the same sort of congressional input and oversight into the projects that are funded. So we will continue to push for better transparency and tracking systems at the agencies so that they can even identify. They've had trouble in the past even telling us everything they own. And frankly, like sometimes they don't even know what they own or manage. And so, we really have to modernize some of those systems to ensure that the BLM can even track what's coming in and what we're acquiring. So,
Terry, we've had a couple of questions come in. If you take a minute.
Sure.
First question was, how is funding out of the oil and gas fund determined and distributed on an annual basis?
So now that it's mandated, so previously it was up to the appropriations committee to decide how much, like of the 900 million that was deposited, how much actually got spent out. And now it's mandatory. So it doesn't have to go through the appropriations committee on an annual basis. They won't have as much oversight over the projects that are funded. I mean, they obviously still have some oversight. They can drag people up and have a, congressional hearing and, have agencies account, but they won't have as much control prior to that happening. And basically, I mean, the regions, at least for the federal side of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, on the federal land acquisition side, usually projects and things are submitted from the regions, and then they go up to DC and, they make determinations on what their priorities are going to be. We want them, focusing on in-holdings and things like that, rather than trying to connect, disparate pieces of land and creating kind of checkerboard patterns. So, we want them to primarily focus on, buying park in-holdings and completing, things that they already own, rather than just trying to kind of like expand out. But those are all conversations, and that, like I said, that's one of our worries, that we won't have as much control in Congress over how that money is spent now that it's a mandatory fund, and there will be, little incentive, to be super accountable. But I understand why people push for it. I understand that it's annoying to have to go to the appropriators every year and, beg for money and, ask them to fully fund it. So I fully understand why people ask for it, but we're just concerned that it may not be the best government policy.
Okay, thanks, Terry. So another question we had, Brian, I wondered if you could address, how is the next committee chair going to be chosen with Rob Bishop's change?
Yeah, I'll lean on Terry a little bit for that, but that's obviously, it's a look ahead to the next Congress. And Terry, we'd like your insights on who the next Republican leader is going to be. Let's just assume, for sake of argument, that the Democrats keep the House after the election. And I would assume that's probably Chairman Grijalva of Arizona, has probably not been term limited. But who do you see as a possible successor to Chairman Bishop, who's been such great help to us over the years?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that. And I mean, it was pure speculation. They typically go off seniority, but it's not always the case. I mean, there are members that jump other members. We have quite a few pretty senior members, but certain members have other committee assignments, that they're more interested in, or, people like Don Young, who's already been a chairman, of the full committee. So he's term limited and can't serve in sort of that leadership role again. But basically the Republican steering committee in the House makes the decision. I don't it's very leadership heavy. So like the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, I think gets 4 votes and Scalise gets 2 votes, and like it's leadership heavy. So it's typically leadership that decides, who the new ranking member, new chairman's going to be. And so they basically, the members go in front of the steering committee that are interested in the position and kind of make their case and tell House leadership, how they're going to work on the committee, what their priorities are going to be. Fundraising matters. So they look, to make sure that they're making their contributions, etc. So it's all just kind of it's a presentation before leadership, and they'll make the decision. Like I said, I think the 2 probably most likely candidates are Tom McClintock of California and Bruce Westerman of Arkansas, but I honestly don't know if other members that are kind of posturing for it or have other deals with the Republican leader. I have no idea. So there's a lot of inside baseball there.
Very good. Well, Terry, thank you much. If you don't mind, if you could just stand by for a while, other questions are continuing to come in.
And Brian, Randy's asked if he could say just a few words because we certainly appreciate all Terry's done, but I think Randy wants to echo that. So Randy, unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And yeah, Terry, Randy Rasmussen, Backcountry Horsemen of America. I really appreciate all you've done over the years and you'll continue to do for public lands. And you've always been gracious to be able to meet with us, share some really good information and insights. And these bills you're talking about are no small potatoes from this session. I mean,
they're
two
big,
of them.
big, yeah.
You know,
I mean, this has been a pretty historic Congress. Yeah.
it really has, probably biggest kind of bills of these scale in the past 50 years. So I really want to thank you and your boss, and the Restore Our Parks Act piece of it. The maintenance backlog piece has been critical to us for a long time. We worked with American Horse Council to pass the National Forest System Trails Stewardship Act a few years ago, but that was an unfunded kind of mandate here. And it was all about the trail maintenance backlog. And now that there's money available for that specific purpose for all the agencies is, a boon to us because we've been complaining for decades about the lack of funding for maintenance. So thank you so much. And please pass it on to your boss that this is.
And regardless of our qualms with some of the things, like we're still pleased about this and we know it'll be a major boon to maintenance and public land, funding. So it's not all sour grapes or anything. Like we had disagreements with, some of our Republican colleagues and obviously many senators, but and my boss still is going to push for, certain reforms to LWCF. Like he's even introduced, a small bill to tweak some things that he was still unhappy with. But, I mean, that's the nature of it. And we're still pleased that they're going to get a lot of funding and have a lot more, ability to finish these projects. The other thing I didn't touch on, there hasn't been any real action on like bikes and wilderness. I know it's still something that a lot of no comment, but it's still something that a lot of Republican members are interested in, but there's just not, political will behind it right now. And so I want to kind of quell your concerns about that.
Okay. Thank you. And congratulations on your forthcoming baby. That's great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of strange to have a pandemic baby, but hopefully it goes well. It's our first child, so
Wow.
he's doing
Terry, if you could stand by, we're going to do a pivot to a quick victory lap here and talk in more detail about the Great American Outdoors Act. We've addressed elements of it, but I would like to tie this together for those on our call who've not been with us through every step.
I actually have one more thing, Brian. Sorry, I mentioned it to you on the phone earlier that I forgot to say. We will continue to focus a lot on forest fire issues. We haven't done really anything on the committee, and so if Congressman Westerman is the new ranking member, next year, he is really, really big on forestry and forest issues. And I think that'll be a huge focus of his. I mean, he does have a national park in his district, but I think he'll be kind of all forests all day. So we will like with Colorado having its, worst fire season in history and California, one of the worst, it'll be a huge focus. And there just hasn't been a lot of common ground on our committee. And frankly, I don't think our Democrats really want to discuss it that much because we're just so far apart on it. So that will be a huge, I think, conversation in the next Congress, especially if Congressman Westerman becomes the new ranking member. So just an FYI.
Okay, no, that's good to know because
And
we have opposed that bill in the
things.
past, and we're glad that it's pretty much stopped dead in its tracks with this Congress. But for everyone on the call, let's do a quick victory lap on the Great American Outdoors Act. It passed this summer in late July. It was a huge bipartisan victory in the House, passing 310 to 107. Went straight to the Senate and passed there 73 to 25. To backtrack, this bill did move pretty rapidly, especially by Capitol Hill standards. In February, horse industry reps met with staff in the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee And during the meeting, Senate staffers did tell us that they intended to draft a recreation package. At that time, the horse industry argued that a broad package should include funding for the backlog maintenance of public trails, as well as robust funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which we have discussed. The LWCF, just so you know, is a trust fund that does include revenues from offshore drilling, and it includes the purchase of private land and rights of way that can be used to purchase easements that promote riding. Hill staff did predict that a rec package would pass before the election, and they were right. Promoting outdoor activity is obviously one area where both parties can come together. Then in early March, before the pandemic closures really hit, Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado introduced the bill. Fortunately for the horse industry, it included many of the elements we had discussed on Capitol Hill in February. Introduction of the bill prompted AHC to issue a call to action, and we drove grassroots letters to the Hill to pass the bill. It's worth noting that as AHC kicked off the grassroots campaign, the pandemic pretty much upended the regular agenda. However, because public health emerged as a key driver for items that didn't get dropped from the agenda, prospects for the Great Outdoors Act did look better than ever. During the course of the next 100 days this spring, the horse industry sent more than 1,000 letters to the Hill to support the bill. Many of the letters included messages that focused on the need to promote healthy outdoor activities. And to further emphasize the two bird and one stone scenario of the package, the Great Outdoors Act incorporates bills on which we have lobbied for the past 3 years and discussed with Terry. They do include the Restore Our Parks Act and permanent funding for LWCF. To get into a little bit more detail, the ROPA front, the law does create a National Public Land Restoration Fund for backlog maintenance. That's capped at about 1.8 or 1.9 billion per year. And consistent with industry advocacy, the fund will support projects managed by a variety of agencies. The original legislations were very focused, but we have expanded to the National Park Service, the Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. So that's pretty much a textbook example of effective advocacy. I'd like to thank everyone on this call who has participated in the grassroots campaign and helped us get to where we are today. So Terry, I don't see any other questions. Do you have any closing thoughts maybe about looking ahead to the lame duck? And I know you addressed it briefly earlier, but these rumors of another lands or rec package possibly coming together after the election.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I misspoke earlier. It is 1.9 billion annually for the Restore Our Parks portion of the Great American Outdoors Act. Sorry, it changed a few times. It was lower in our House bill. I think we only had 1.3 billion annually. So the Senate upped it by about 600 million for those 5 years. Yeah, like I was saying before, Brian, we've still got a number of things that we're really interested in. The SOAR Act and the Recreation Not Red Tape Act, being one of those. I assume if anything happens, it would be more just the SOAR Act stuff. But we really haven't heard anything from the Senate yet in terms of how they're going to approach this. So it's kind of hard to say, a week before the election. I think they're just kind of waiting to see if they'll have, a majority still, or we'll be going into the minority. I mean, frankly, if the Senate flips and the president flips, I don't think our Democrats will have much incentive to do anything with us. Because they'll just wait until the next administration and the new Senate comes in to move more items. Chairman Grijalva, I think, will be pushing a lot of sort of climate change focused things, a lot of environmental justice related items. And if the Senate flips, they'll be pushing that even harder. But the SOAR Act, it passed out of the Natural Resources Committee on a bipartisan vote. It's very, very bipartisan in the House. So we've been a little bit frustrated by the Senate and their, unwillingness to work with us on it. They, like I said, they have concerns about opening up FLREA, the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act, which authorizes agencies to collect fees and issue different types of permits, and they just haven't wanted to touch that in the Senate. Just I guess because they don't know what they would get if they opened it up, and they're just concerned about that. But we've been really frustrated by agency permitting processes for a long time, and think that this is a pretty incredible solution when you have, you know, private outfitters and guides and the Wilderness Society and Republicans and Democrats like all supporting the same bill, but we can't get the Senate to move on it. It's pretty frustrating. So and I'm just trying to think if there's any other like trails bills or anything else we're working on that would affect sort of horsemen or backcountry horsemen. I don't know. I mean, are there any other bills you're monitoring that you want updates
that's
on? Or
that's a pretty good segue. Recently, we have gotten engaged with the MAP Land Act in the Senate. And on September 16th, the Senate Energy Natural Resources did conduct a hearing on the bill. It's the Modernizing Access to Public Land Act of 2020. It's a very narrow bill, only 6 pages long, and it directs the Department of Interior, U.S. Forest Service, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to adopt uniform standards for data collection related to various federal lands. The bill focuses on usage of certain vehicles. And as written, it only applies to specific types of vehicles rather than activities. This prompted AHC to send a letter to the committee, and we requested inclusion of certain language that would encompass recreational riding. While the bill doesn't authorize any new programs, it could serve as a tool for gathering data that reflects the importance of recreational riders within the context of public land usage. Staff with the Senate Energy Committee informed AHC that they believed that they would adopt our suggested changes. The only question, Terry, is whether or not the bill actually moves forward this year. I'm going to display an excerpt of a letter that we did send to Chairwoman Lisa Murkowski to make a quick change to the bill. So hopefully you guys can see Section 5 from the legislation. To recap, the original language just focuses on vehicles. Obviously, horses are not vehicles. So we seek to encompass activities that would include horseback riding. And again, there's no new money associated with this bill. It's just data collection. And we can use that to leverage resources moving forward.
yeah, I know that Representative Fulcher has been pushing this hard in the House. I haven't heard anything from our Democrats by way of like legislative hearings or anything on it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it would be like particularly controversial, but it does have a small price tag because it provides like 30 million per year for some of the like database creation and everything that they have to do. But it's a bill we would support. It's a bill that kind of gets at the problem I was talking about earlier, that, you know, it's really hard to track what we own and easements and just knowing all the places people can recreate. It's a frustration we've had for years.
Mm-hmm.
And anecdotally, I'll give you one example. So there was a small land transfer in S47 to the city of Hyde Park where I grew up, and it was 80 acres of BLM land. And the city came to us a few years ago and basically said, hey, we looked at our city maps and we have this parcel of federal land. It just says United States of America on it. And we don't know who owns it. We don't know who, you know, administers it, manages it. And so we looked into it. We thought it might have been Forest Service land at first. We called the Forest Service and they told us it wasn't theirs. Like, had to call the BLM. They found a planning document from the 1980s that had identified it for disposal. Like, but it took committee staff maybe like a full week to even figure out which agency owned it, which agency managed it. And so I think we need to really modernize, you know, our databases. I mean, we've made strides, and there are obviously like GIS maps of a lot of places, and I think we're doing better, but there's still a long way to go in ensuring that we even know where all the federal land we own is. And my boss frequently says, basically, like, if the public can't access the public lands that they supposedly own, like, there's not a whole lot of point in the federal government owning it if it can't even be accessed or can't be used by the public. So he's really big on pushing for access. And if we're going to acquire $900 million more in federal land every year, or not all 900 million will be federal land, but if we're going to have 900 million to spend on additional land acquisition, we might as well have access to it and have an ability to understand where it all is. So.
Great. Well, Terry, thank you very much for the update. That's very, very helpful. Very helpful. And we appreciate all of your hard work that you've been doing on behalf of recreation and outdoorsmen.
Thank you, Brian. And yeah, feel free, you can send around my contact information. I'm hoping to stay with the committee in the new Congress, but we've always enjoyed working with you guys, and we'll continue to try to find common ground on your issues and help you guys push your agenda forward. So thank you for inviting me. And if
All right.
I'm happy to answer any other questions, if there's any other questions.
Great, thank you very much. So, Mr. Chairman, that's pretty much a good recap of everything that's taken place on the Hill. How about if we talk about some of the activity taking place at the agency level?